before we get started, I always like to just share about who we are. I think it matters who's speaking and where we're coming from. So Round Sky is a worker-owned cooperative, and we work with all types of leaders and organizations that value and want to improve their democratic and participatory processes. And at the heart of our work is about shifting and nurturing generative power dynamics in our teams. And we believe that part of that process is part of shifting power is processes and tools, not the only thing, but it can be really helpful. So we really focus on that. And we also focus on personal development within our work. Today, we're going to be looking at processes and tools. And part of our processes include sociocratic methods, along with other frameworks. So you might find things that feel familiar and things that feel different. Feel free to ask questions about that. And we call our work CoLab. And so we'll share that with you today. And before I get too far, I want to also hear from you and who's attending. If you're willing to use the chat box and let us know your name, your pronouns, and where you're coming from today, along with what you're hoping to get out of this session. And if you have more in you, to share what makes you feel, what helps you to feel powerful and alive in your work. And I'll take a chance to check those out. Welcome, Marg. And while you all do that, I am going to share a quick word about myself. So I'm Rebecca, my pronouns are she, hers, and I currently live and have been in New Orleans for 7 years, although I'm originally from California. And I'm really excited to be presenting this because shifting power and understanding power have been important to me as long as I can remember. I never grew out of asking why are we doing that? What's happening? And I've experienced lots of power dynamics in spaces that were meant to resist oppression and spaces that were alternatives to the norm, and been very disappointed about that. So even in groups of very intentional people, power dynamics show up, and it can be helpful to have tools to work through that. So that's what I'm excited about today. And I'll invite Daniel to say a little bit more about himself.
Cool, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I'm Daniel Little, he, him. I'm in Vermont, United States, and also one of the members at our Round Sky cooperative here. I'm an integral coach. I'm an instructor here, one of the founders here at Round Sky, and I really love helping people learn and grow. I particularly love kind of the individual growth journey of a person through their life and through through finding their way in their work and their life, and love doing that through the body, through dance and through movement and things like that. The blend of my personal life with my professional life is growing more interesting for me, and I really want to live in a world where we're all really empowered to live lives of creativity and contribution. And there's so many ways in which that's not possible. So let's work on it. And it's basically my attitude. Let's keep getting to work. And so really excited to present some of our thoughts and hear from you today and learn from each other. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. And thanks everybody for introducing yourselves, and the land acknowledgements and your introductions are welcome and a good reminder for me. So thank you. And today in this webinar workshop, we'll be talking about how to understand power flows using this tool. So I think it layers really well with other tools around understanding power. So this is one of them. We call it the Power Matrix. And we'll also be diving into some of the dynamics that you're experiencing and working through how we might shift those dynamics through some other process tools. So, and other things that you have thought about yourself. So there will be time for you to also bring up what you've tried and what's working. So that's the flow of today. We're going to start with defining and understanding power. So I wanted to next hear what's coming up for you all when you think of this word. I've used the word power a lot, and it's not, I'm sure every single person in this room is thinking about something different. There's probably a lot of overlaps, and I would love to hear what you're thinking. So I just put a link in there, and we're putting you all on this page that has a bunch of different links of what we'll go to today. So if you scroll down to this button that says shared a 1 to 3 word reflection on power, we're going to create a little word cloud to see what's coming up to create a collective picture. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a second while you all do that. And if you're confused, that's okay. I'm about to show you what I mean. Okay. So you should be on this page and then scrolling down to this button, if that makes sense. And if this is just way too much, just put it in the chat box in all caps and I'll put it in for you. So I'll start if you're still kind of orienting to what I'm asking you to do, is to share what's coming up on your thoughts of power. And I'm going to start. And one thing that comes up for me is this sense of under the surface that I'll type in here, if it lets me, under the surface. And you can have 4 different options. And something else I'm thinking about is embedded in structures and harm. Those are some things that I think. So I'm going to submit that. And then in a second, I'll bring up the word cloud, which actually should be right here. Yes. All right. Can you all still see my screen? Hit thumbs up or wiggle your, okay, thank you. So, wow, great. Lots of things coming up. Challenging, water, hidden, ooh, it's moving a lot. Energy, inequality, domination, dangerous, men, feeling upset, disempowerment of others. There's a lot of the harmful pieces of power come up when we think about it. There's also autonomy, collaboration. Yep, not a dirty word. Absolutely good addition there, or helpful addition there. Dominant, influence, change, force, right? Force, and that's not necessarily bad. Force is like, I can force my coffee cup. I can force myself into the world in powerful ways. Agency, energy, absolutely. Rights. This is really great. And you all, this is just on that link, so you can check it out if you want to check it out more after this. But I think this is helpful because there's a lot that comes up here. There's this legacy of domination in the world that we're living in. And there's also the positive things that make things happen that can be really good and really useful. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that also today. And thanks for sharing. So I wanted to now get on the same page. Well, what are we talking about power? Like when I'm mentioning power today. So I'm going to come back to this, and this should work. Okay. And how we analyze it and make sense of power is by using this definition from Paul Tillich, the drive of everything living to realize itself with increasing intensity and extensity. And we're thinking of power as the force of enactment. So it's really just our ability to make something happen in the world. And one of the big variables there is who are we talking about when we say our force of enactment? And is that an individual? Is that my team at work, my whole organization? Who has this force of enactment? So that's something we can talk about a bit today. But we're using power as pretty neutral as a definition. And that can be used like Laura just put in the chat, power over or power with. It can be used in negative ways, in really generative ways. So we're using it neutral, and we're in a way to analyze what are the dynamics that are happening. So that's the framework we're coming from today. And we're going to jump back to that other screen for a second, because I want to hear from you all about, now that I've offered you the definition, what are some experiences that are coming up for you, to go a little bit deeper. And if you're willing to share an experience of power that you've had recently or that sticks in your mind, and maybe something you thought of when you saw the title of this workshop. And if you could share with us just a few sentences about that. A says, I have a lot of energy and feel like that's a gift I bring to a group. Have had lots of people echo that too. It can be hard to figure out what to do when someone experiences that energy, that gift, as oppressive. That's a really powerful example. That maybe someone might call that charisma, but it doesn't sound like that's really what's happening here. But that sense of swaying a group that speaks to people is definitely powerful. Some people speak to every point on the agenda, while others rarely say anything. Long-term involvement gives some people more power. Yes, we'll be talking a little bit about that and how that shows up. That's so common. Let's see, experience of men playing power games, vying for status and control. Yes, patriarchy happening within our co-ops, within our organizations. Thanks, Ruth, for responding to Ditlev. And let's see, feeling like I need to work hard to access power in the group and then receiving feedback that my actions make others feel powerless. Oof, that sounds very complicated and hard to deal with, hard to figure out what to do. So we're going to come back to this. These are really great. Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to leave this open in the background and come back. And before we do that, I would like to invite Daniel to talk more about this tool, the Power Matrix, and then we'll get into some of how that looks.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, this is great. I'm glad we're starting to just get into our own, experiences of, both the, the good, bad, and the ugly, or whatever, of power dynamics. And so at Round Sky, one of our other co-op members, Cecile Green, was doing a bunch of really deep thought work a number of years ago, and put together this idea to realize that there's these two frameworks, these two elements, in a sense, of power that she wanted to call out. And then she realized, oh, they could go together and we could put it on a little map. And I love maps, so it's fun. It's fun in a sense. It's a very simple map, but can be very helpful. Because it can be applied to, it just really applies to, we feel confident that this applies to like working together, right? Like that's the context that this comes out of, is like, how do we work together to get things done, projects done, things like that. But we think also that this makes sense, that this could be applied more generally as well to larger, society and things like that. So, so yeah, just check it out and see what you think. So let's see here. One of the key dynamics that around power that we wanted to call out is this dialogue in power between the needs of the individual and the needs of the collective. And over time and across cultures, we've come up with a lot of different kind of like agreements about like, oh, what power should be granted to the individual and what power should be granted to the group, basically, right? And that but if we have a map like this, we can say, well, this is dynamic. This is something that we can negotiate for ourselves. What actually makes sense in our context. So in the power matrix, we show this as a spectrum on the vertical line of the power matrix, with autonomous up at the top and collective at the bottom. And when we say autonomous power, we say that that's the power that any given individual, that's in a group or a role within an organization, what influence they have, what power they have over the matters of their own work and their life. For example, we might have a business owner with in our cultural agreements, we have they have the power to sell the business or to hire new staff or something like that, right? Or we have a role of a designated facilitator. That's autonomous power they've been given that power by the group to guide them through the process, of decision making or something like that, right? So those are examples of autonomous power. And collective power is the power of that a group or a community has over their work and life together. For example, you could say a cooperative membership's power to vote, on what's presented to them. Say, it's a consumer co-op or something, and they have, they've been given something to vote on, and they can do that. Or the power of a self-directed team to decide the best way to fulfill on the work that they're responsible for. So those are forms of collective power. The other distinction that we wanted to call out, though, is that in order to create healthy power, we want to investigate the expression of power on a spectrum of implicit to explicit. Explicit, is just that. It's clear, it's spoken, it's written, or it's otherwise very clearly agreed upon, sanctioned forms of power. We could say that an example of explicit power might be the authority given to the role of a chief financial officer to make a lot of the financial decisions. What is in their purview, and they have power, in that domain. Yeah, that's explicit power. Or we could say, implicit power, on the other hand, is the hidden and unspoken, assumed forms of power. Right? We say, one of the examples. The ability of a strong or persuasive personality to have more influence on the decisions that are happening. Yeah, that's a really common thing. People are different and show up differently, and it can have more sway in a certain sense. And of course, a big piece of this implicit power is things like race and gender and education, age, seniority within an organization. All of these things can show up as implicit forms of power within our teams. So, in a sense, this implicit power is the place of privileges that go with, our various identities, things like that. So cool. So, I think this really layers. Well, that's you, Rebecca. I'm going to turn it over to you. Yeah, you were going to say a couple words on the next step.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Just going to say that. So I mentioned earlier that I think this work layers well with anti-oppression analyses and lenses. And so when we're looking at this isn't the full picture, but I think it layers really well with how we think about anti-racism work and also diversity, equity, inclusion work. It layers really well. So this can be an added resource for you. And with the Power Matrix, like I said earlier, we believe that none of these powers are inherently bad. Power isn't inherently bad, nor is implicit power inherently bad. They just are, and it all depends on how they're used in these real situations. That we're coming at this neutral, analytical. We're questioning: is this feeling generative? Is this feeling degenerative? Healthy? Unhealthy? Autonomous power isn't necessarily bad. It's only bad if it's stagnating the person, or it's power over, or if it's creating harm. But then collective power can be kind of used in similar ways. It can stagnate a group from moving work forward. It can, people can act in really harmful ways together. We've seen that in really big senses. And we also see these dynamics happening in horizontal or flat cooperative organizations that won't give people power over the work. They won't delegate authority to individuals and want to make decisions together all the time. And that we believe that that's not actually the best way to go about it. So this map is about having a conversation about what's healthy, not autonomous versus collective, but how do we create consent around healthy power and change dynamics that are not working. So facilitating healthy power dynamics is an art, of course, and it takes skill and tools to be able to do that. And we have some guiding practices, basically guiding principles, possibly. So one thing is that healthy power is consensual power, consenting on how power is used and where people are using it both autonomously and collectively, that we're in some sort of agreement about how we're going to do things around here and how we're making decisions and how we're sharing work. And then it's not going to be perfect. Don't expect that as you're going through this. And that is also, it's never static. You're not going to reach healthy power and then you're there. You're not like with anti-racism work. You're not anti-racist and then you're there and you're done. It's a lifelong process. It's a process of shifting power. Things are fluid and they change over time, and we understand things differently. And that's a dialogue of people in your team. And in order for us to be really good participants, we have to be in touch with ourselves and how we want to share power and how we see those changes happening. So having some type of process to be grounded is super helpful. So now that we've kind of oriented you to this tool, let's see how it works. Let's apply some situations to it. So Daniel has an example that he's gonna share with us.
Okay, cool. So let's build a little scenario in our minds. Say we've got an organization, it's been around for a while, but it's recently been growing, it's adding new staff. And overall, there's a sense of wanting to move on, create new directions. And they've created a team specifically to chart this new direction with new staff and old staff included to do this redirection work, yeah? Amongst the leadership of the organization, let's say there's a guy, let's call him Jim. So Jim, he's well-liked, he's a good guy. He's been there for a bunch of years and people go to Jim for support and advice since he knows the history of the place. He's good with people. Some of the new staff really appreciated how well he was kind of informally able to help them get up to speed during their onboarding process. But it's been a number of months now. The need for change is still really pressing. And some of the newer folks who are on this team, working on this change process work with Jim are starting to get frustrated with him for the influence he has as they work on decisions about new directions. Some of them have a growing frustration about their lack of influence to be able to move the change forward, even though they were brought on, in part to move this change process forward. So while Jim's perspective still seems to get a lot of traction, yeah, exactly. There's this dynamic, right? Like Jim's perspective gets a lot of traction and they're feeling a little like, we can't quite get our ideas in there and get them taken seriously. And just to make, more pointed, let's say that, Jim is a middle-aged white man, in a fairly diverse team overall. Does this sound familiar? Organizations are always in the process of change, and who has the power to make that change happen and in what direction? That kind of stuff comes up all the time. And sometimes it's clear how that process can unfold and often it's not. So if we want to look at this in the power matrix, analyze this a bit, we could say that Jim currently has a lot of implicit autonomous power. We'd put Jim up in that quadrant there, with the blend of implicit and autonomous. And, and he has that from his seniority with the organization. It gives him history, it gives him, he also has this good ability with people. So he derives a lot of power to sway things in the direction that he feels are useful. And perhaps another layer deeper, these implicit powers are likely heightened, of course, by his social privileges of his race and gender and age identities. And he may or may not be aware of this implicit power. He may or may not be using it for what he sees as the greater good. From my description of him, I think he's trying to do right, but still, is this the way the team wants it to be? Maybe not. So, meanwhile, the team has been given the explicit collective power to make some decisions about new directions. And so we could put the team down in the, the explicit collective power. This group has been called together to make these changes. And each individual on the team also probably has a range of power conferred to them based on their various roles within the organization, which would be their explicit autonomous power to act on things that have been agreed upon related to the authorities of that position that they're energizing within the team. if these frustrated members start talking amongst themselves about the situation and what they could do to support each other, and doing something about it, then we could also say that they're beginning to enact a certain kind of implicit collective power, right? It's not formalized, but they're trying to gather their implicit power to do something about this as they talk with each other and try to figure out, like, what can we do about this situation? And they're talking, behind, as they talk in the hallway at the water cooler or something like that. So in general, when we're using the power matrix to help us understand a situation and what to do about it, first we can map out some of the dynamics, but then we can ask some questions like, are there implicit things that would be helpful to make explicit? That's a really big key question that the power matrix lends, to our analysis. And then how is the balance of autonomous power and collective power working for us? Is there a good negotiated, kind of place, where we sort, what responsibilities and powers and authorities are autonomous and what is held by the collective decision making? So in this case, I imagine it'd be helpful to name some of the implicit, name those implicit dynamics and see if there are explicit new patterns of operating that would be helpful. Perhaps Jim's implicit autonomous power could be moderated by enhancing the explicit collective power of the team's decision-making process. Maybe they could be more clear about how they're actually making decisions, ensuring that they have a process that effectively gathers all the needed viewpoints without letting one dominate intentionally or not. Perhaps explicit autonomous power needs to be clarified by making sure that all the various roles are really clear and that everyone knows what they're accountable for. By revisiting the balance of what decisions need to be collective and what needs to be autonomous, that's the negotiation that this team could do. In the end, we're looking for health, we're looking for well-being, we're looking for something that works, so that advances the greater good of everybody involved, and that it's a workable distribution of authority and decision-making that serves that health and well-being and workability. Yeah, so back to you, Rebecca.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So I wanted to give us time to work through one of the examples that you all provided together and then see where that takes us. So,
let's see here. How am I doing this? Okay, right. So I'm going to lay out another little scenario, which then we can kind of look at in a couple of ways. I want to look at, the two questions I said, like what's implicit that needs to be explicit being a key question, and what's the balance of autonomous and collective that needs to be renegotiated, right? Those are the two kind of things. So I'm going to give a little scenario, and then we're going to go into like looking at that scenario from those two questions in a sense. So my little scenario is, we often hear about power dynamics that fall into the category sometimes called like founder syndrome. So let's say there's a founder of an organization and they have a lot of implicit power. They've been saying, right, and working on many ways to make the organization into a more truly cooperative effort. So they're in process to being, a much more cooperative organization. But kind of like in the Jim example earlier, they still seem to have a lot of implicit power. This founder still seems to have a lot of implicit and explicit, to a degree, autonomous power based on their history with the organization. The other members of the team are attracted to the vision of the organization and the stated ethos of cooperation, but they're getting frustrated with how difficult it is to get out of this dynamic. In fact, the leader's getting frustrated too. But so far, the efforts haven't really been effective for this organization. They have with a rather loose organizational style that's based a lot on their kind of like self-identity as a group, in a sense of like, we do this through good personal relationships. They want to work together. They have good interpersonal relationships, but they're getting frustrated now with the lack of actual progress towards cooperative management, in a sense. So let's look at this then through the power matrix. We can see that there are dynamics related to implicit and explicit. The organization is having a difficult time changing the habits of their history. The implicit sense of how we do things around here isn't working for them anymore. And we can also see that there needs to be, a renegotiation between, the autonomous and collective power. So how do you work with implicit and explicit? I'm really curious, like in your organizations, do you have specific guiding principles or process tools or structures that could be implemented that you use, for instance, or have used or would like to use, you know, that are helpful in surfacing what's implicit and getting that to become explicit, you know, to get surface these things so that they're not dragging the organization down. So we wanted to invite you to share your tool or your principle or whatever it is that you're thinking of in the chat and say, like, how do you shift these kinds of dynamics? Like what's worked for you, or what ideas do you have? So let's do that now. Let's see what comes up.
If it feels like too much to chat and there's more of like a sense of what you do, maybe it's not like a step-by-step process, we want to hear that too. So feel free to unmute yourself if you want to share. Oh, we have some in the chat box here. So for those who are listening only, forming committees, circles that have decision-making authority, a way to work with the implicit, explicit dynamics, especially around founder syndrome. I worked as a consultant in a university-run center with a similar dynamic, and have to say my main tool was hitting my head against the wall. That said, I think there's value in locking on to the mission, purpose, and trying to detach from the personality. Mm-hmm. That the founder's mission, the founder's personality is not the mission, that it's separate. We're working on our personal feedback to discuss some of the power, needs, and feelings in the group. Yeah, sometimes just naming it, feedback that this is happening, can be helpful. Performance reviews, practicing naming observations. I think rounds are helpful to bring everyone's participation and voice to the group, absolutely. Oh, there's lots of messages here, or responses. Great, thank you for these.
Yeah, invite you all to scan that list. There's some really great stuff here. Grievance council, separate from the co-op board and members. That's a great idea. It's like having ways to bring things out into the open that are safe, and that are workable. That's fantastic. So yeah, so related to some of the things that we heard. That I'm hearing here, like rounds and things like that, like how do we hear from folks? We have this idea of we call them tension-driven meetings, or something. This principle around the idea of tensions, So we let's see. I need to take a breath, I guess. So yeah, one of the interventions that we have here at Round Sky in our work with CoLab is to use this concept we call tensions. It basically just means that there's space for everyone to get their topics onto the agenda of a meeting. It's kind of as simple as that. Like everyone in the organizations knows that they have the space to bring up what they sense needs attention. And if that's the case, then these implicit things, whoever happens to be sensing it or feeling the discomfort of like something's not said, or whatever, then they can bring it out. That's how it kind of addresses the implicit. We all have such an amazing ability to sense what needs our attention. It starts in a sense with each of us noticing what's going on in our own bodies and minds. And if we have a place to bring this, if we have a place to bring this where we know we'll be heard, then our ability to notice what's needed doesn't get shut down and swept under the rug. A lot of times, all the things that are kind of not working quite right can get put aside because there's no place for them. But if there's a place, then they can come forward. And it becomes really useful feedback for the organization, enabling us to learn and grow and change and adapt things. So we call these sensed opportunities for change tensions. And this could literally mean like a tension in the body in a sense, because we, we sense something that's affecting us, but it's not necessarily negative. I really like to think of the word tension as like a bow, like the tension on a bow, or the tension of a suspension bridge. It's like connecting us from where we are to where we want to go. And one way of thinking about tensions is it's just potential energy waiting to be released. So when it comes to shifting power, we want to gather the views and the creativity of everyone on the team, and having a consistent way to do that is a key step for that. In our work with CoLab, we have a whole meeting flow that includes agenda building section where everybody can contribute and build, bring their part to the table. And this shifts power because everyone is learning to sense what's implicit, and that needs to be made explicit. In many organizations, people who haven't had the power to determine what's even talked about, it's so common to have the agenda, fixed ahead of time, maybe with input, maybe not, who knows. So yeah, so that's an example of tensions. So some specific things, like it's not clear to me, like these specific examples, it's not clear to me how we're actually making decisions about our new initiatives. Let's sort that out and get clear. Or I'm not sure what authority I have in my role to make key decisions while we're trying to institute this fully cooperative way of operating. Or the founder might have a tension like, I'm feeling a growing frustration whenever I make suggestions. How can we clear that up? If these tensions get addressed, then we're moving implicit forms of power that aren't working into the open for explicit consideration. So if you want to give this a try, create space in your meetings for everyone to bring forward what they're sensing needs attention. It's important to be consistent and to stick with it, so everyone has a place to, as a place for this and a chance to practice it, because it's a practice really, not just a concept, but a doing. And by doing that, we can grow that capacity and tap and harness the brilliance of all the people, all the participants that are there.
Yeah.
That naturally leads to, I'll just say one quick thing here. It naturally leads to like, okay, then how do we decide, and the other kinds of things. We also may need to have explicit decision-making, processes and stuff like that. Now, what do we do with this once we have it? But the first step is like finding these things. They're gold that we can use.
Yeah. I'll jump in for a second, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And the thing I really love about this tool, the tension-driven meetings, is that it kind of it distributes some of the power that a facilitator has to the people that are in the meeting making decisions on the team, to bring up their tensions, to bring up what they're sensing. And it's not one day you're using other meeting practice and then you're using this one. Like, it takes time to get there, for people to feel comfortable bringing up some of these things that can be uncomfortable, or the tensions that we're feeling. It can sometimes be dangerous to share. And when we build enough trust in our teams, we build the process that kind of holds us in it. It can be really helpful for shifting power as a tool, and a feedback loop in some ways. Like, I'm putting this on the agenda, and maybe the person they just sense it. They don't really know what's needed, but they need it to be together. We problem solve in that space about, okay, well, what's next? So I just want to share that that's something that I've noticed is really helpful about tension-driven meetings.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's great. So I wanted next to look at the autonomous and collective side of our example here. Again, my question is, in your organizations, do you have any specific guiding principles or process tools or structures that you use or that could be implemented that help you surface and work with rebalancing and renegotiating this, what's in the purview of the individual, the autonomous action, and what's needs to be collective decision, collective, movement, in a sense. So how do you renegotiate that balance, or what are ideas or structures or principles do you have to work with that rebalancing?
Great. And if this is harder to say in text, feel free to unmute yourself. We could probably hear from one or two people if you'd like to do that.
May I?
Sure.
Yeah.
I really enjoy performance reviews, like in the Sociocratic way, where the whole group takes the time to like focus on a person, and that way, there's an improvement plan on what to change, and sort of making that commitment in front of a group and saying, hey, I'm committed to making these changes on myself and working and so on, and that the group consents to it and says like, yes, this meets our needs. I think really ensures accountability on both sides, and that way like committing to transform is actually like an act of care held with the other people's, and like I think it really puts our interdependence in the forefront, and I've really enjoyed that.
That's great. The interdependence between the autonomy of each member and the group providing holding and feedback and the growth for both. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Great example. We have some in the chat also. Unless anybody else wants to unmute their mic and share. Great. So some in the chat are saying creating operational roles. Absolutely. Making it an explicit autonomous role it can be really helpful and helps clarify expectations also that the team has for a person and that person has for themselves even. On key decisions, using a 4-way voting system, agreement by added improvements. I'm okay with this, but this won't help, or objection, this needs to be discussed. That's interesting. I like that for 4-way voting system. It's a little more nuanced than yes or no. Nature of our organization means high turnover, so frequent conversation is necessary to even orient, as the balance is often shifting organically. Yeah. High turnover, I'm not sure what kind of organization you work with, but high turnover is very challenging on an organization, just how much work it takes to orient someone and like for the team to bring them up to speed to the culture, to understand everything, and putting care into that person, and then for them to leave is challenging for sure. Maybe counterproductive, but sometimes we've had to just remove members who refuse to yield to collective power. That sounds like a really complex, challenging situation, Sarah. Daring Greatly by Brene Brown reminds us to remain vulnerable and identify areas of shame that may prevent our collective growth. Yeah, Brene Brown has some great work around that vulnerability piece and how that shows up in our team. I think in more cooperative teams, it really is a strength to bring that for them. And it kind of, I would say, is in more the implicit realm, unless you have a policy around being vulnerable. But Brene Brown might have that I haven't seen. Great, thank you for these tools. I'm gonna pass it to Daniel to talk more about what one of our approaches is.
Yeah, so one of the things kind of on the explicit side of the diagram that we can do that balances the autonomous and the collective is by getting really clear about what individuals and groups in an organization are responsible for what aspects of the work and decision making. We use a framework of what we call scopes and roles to understand how autonomous and collective power flow in the organization. We use the word scopes in CoLab. It's really pretty much synonymous with circles or teams or pods, committees, departments, et cetera. There's a lot of names for different kinds of ways of thinking about collectives that do things or make decisions together, right? But we talk about scope. We think about what's the scope of work, that's in what are the boundaries of the work that the responsibility that this team, in a sense, is responsible for. So we call them scopes. And we define those scopes by clarifying their mission. Like each scope has their own mission that's a subset of the overall organizational mission. And yeah, so then within each scope, we have roles, and roles are a specific area of work that's defined by what it's accountable for, including what work needs to be done and what decision-making goes with that accountability. In general, we subscribe to the principle that people should have power over the work they do, and so that they can be creative and move forward, with that work as they see fit. And roles are created within each scope by the members of that scope and are specific to the work of that group. So we see here the dance of kind of the autonomous and the collective. The collective holding the container, the larger container for the mission of the work that they're tasked for, and roles being delegated the accountabilities to put that into action for various subsets of the work. Okay, let's see. What else I want to say? Yeah, I said already, we really like to give roles as much autonomous power as seems doable, given the specific needs of the scope. And giving away as much power to roles as seems feasible really helps keep the collective power focused on the larger questions that really need collective decision-making, like matters that affect multiple roles within the scope. Then we, of course, we need to coordinate amongst those different pieces of the work. And since we have this tension-driven process, the balance of collective and autonomous power that needs to be adjusted, as it needs to be adjusted to changing circumstances, we can bring it up and we can make the needed change. Oh, that role's not needed anymore. We don't really do that anymore. Let's get rid of it and let's make a new one. That kind of thing. And this tool is all about how we share power together and trust each other in collaboration and support each other in collective structures of accountability. So like a really quick example, say we have a communication scope. And the communication scope is to communicate our value proposition compellingly throughout our sales process, to increase awareness of who we are and build an engaged community of enthusiastic supporters and partners. Okay, that's the mission. That defines the general territory that this scope is working on. And then within that scope, we have roles. Say we have the website wizard and the MailChimp wrangler. They are, the website wizard has some specific accountabilities. Among them might be editing content and layout of the website, or provide in-house support for technical issues related to the website. And the MailChimp wrangler might have a couple of accountabilities, probably more, but the first main couple, setting up and maintaining the email marketing platforms, maintaining the email marketing list within such systems. So in the founder syndrome scenario, we could make a few general comments, keeping it pretty high level. I can imagine a lot of the difficulty comes from the implicit autonomous power that the founder has. You can see up in that upper quadrant with the implicit and autonomous. There's the founder and their implicit power over the organization. So we think perhaps that by shifting, we could shift that through getting really clear about the collective power of the scopes in the organization. Like what are the various areas of work within the organization and what authority do they have, and just getting really clear and explicit about that. And then each of those scopes would need to get really clear and explicit about the roles that they need to do their work effectively, right? So they would have the collectively decide, use their collective power to create, pockets of autonomous explicit power in the form of the roles that are needed to actually do the work. And many of the roles may already exist and stuff. They just need to be clarified and tuned up so that they match the desire of the organization and the needs of the organization as it currently is, instead of the way it was. So that's all really general, but I hope it gives a sense of how you could use the power matrix to shift these power dynamics that aren't working anymore. Yeah, so if you have any questions about all that, we're going to do questions in a couple minutes, but I'll turn it back over to Rebecca.
Yeah, there's some great questions in the chat box, which we'll get to in a second. And this is, roles are such a rich topic and tool for shifting power in teams. It's very, once a dynamic is happening that's not working for us or is becoming harmful, a role can be one tool to really make it explicit that we're giving someone else this power, or we're shifting this power over this work to another person, which can open up so much for everybody involved. And this is one piece of the puzzle. There are many little puzzle pieces that fit together and the work that we do that could be useful. So if the tension-driven meetings piece to you spoke to you in some way or felt interesting, we'd love to talk more about that. I have a blog on it, and okay. So I have a blog on it, and you can get into that more if you'd like. And we also have more opportunities for diving into power dynamics with us. Really at the heart of our work is shifting power through meeting processes and decision-making and roles and all of these people development and how that fits in. So if you want this slideshow and if you want the handouts that I've mentioned today, you can sign up on that same page that you went to the Kudos board, and it will send you an immediate email and a series of these different things. And also, if you want to talk about this with a cohort setting and about how to get the cohort setting and the people to work with it, you can check out our course. It's not until May, but you can check it out and talk to me to see if it's a good fit. And then if you want to just talk through some of these things with me, you can email me and I can talk to you about what could be next. Some of these things are a lot easier when you have an outside support. So I just wanted to offer those potential next steps. And now I would like to open up for Q&A. We have a good amount of time to hear from people. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now. So we're kind of here with each other. And I wanted to scroll back and see some of the questions that were coming up. Shayna, and if I say anybody's name wrong, feel free to unmute and correct me, said that they would love to hear how people navigate all of this over Zoom meetings. A recurring issue is I've experienced people interrupting others who talk a lot, but it adds to the stress. And Daniel, do you have anything you want to say about that?
Well, I heard a suggestion from the group earlier, like rounds, like organize the meeting, use a lot more rounds on Zoom so that you know exactly what, order you're going in. And one of the little tricks that we do is when we do check-ins at the beginning, we call that that's random. We check in a kind of random order, but then we write that down and we have that's our default order of attention, we call it. So that every time we do a round, we know exactly what order we're going in already because it was the same order we checked in as. And so it just streamlines things and helps people stay on track.
And know when it's their turn. So it's not like, oh, it's not going to get to me, they're going to forget me, or like, I need to get my thing in now. That can be helpful. I'd also say that this tension-driven meeting, sometimes people speak over other people and it's semi-related, but it's kind of something else. It's like, it's not at the core of what we were talking about, but they want to make sure it is brought in because everything's interconnected. And what we do is we say, that sounds like a little bit of a separate tension. Let's put it on the agenda so that we can give it time, but we're going to focus on what this person brought today first. Or we may rejuggle what we're talking about and change the order, but having a space to put it is really helpful. And then it tells the person, we're going to hear you out, but we're not going to let this derail what we're talking about in this moment. So good question. And then the timekeeper response is also, we generally don't keep time at Round Sky, but I've seen that it can be really helpful to time block things. I'm going to open it up though to see if other questions are coming up for people now. You can unmute your mic.
I had a question that I put in the chat. and it's that I hadn't heard about scopes before.
Oh.
And I was just curious if it sounded similar to domains, but I don't want to assume that they're the same thing. And I think also someone asked if that was like a standard sociocratic term or not. I think it was Sarah.
Well, it's definitely not. I'm not someone who's really familiar with sociocracy should comment, but I believe that the scopes are pretty much synonymous with circles.
Yeah, we define it as an area of work. And so this is part of where our work a little bit deviates from sociocracy, but I think it's in line in terms of circles, but we define it as an area of work. And I'm not sure, did that come from Holacracy, Daniel, possibly?
I mean, we did learn a bunch of stuff from them, so that's part of the.
Could be.
The page. I don't know.
But Cecile, our co-worker, our co-owner would know the exact answer to that. So if you really want to know like the nitty gritty, we can share more. We can get your email and nerd out a little bit about all the differences and similarities. Other questions? I'd love to hear more about setting agendas. Good question. Daniel, you want to start?
Sure. Well, and this kind of ties into the Zoom thing too, because we always use what we call a living agenda, and for us that's just a Google Doc that we use for the same, like for this, if we have a, say we have this communication scope, we have a communication scope living agenda, and we use the same document for like a whole year and put all our notes and stuff for the meeting into there. But in terms of tension surfacing on in agenda building, we generally have that agenda available for people to put their tensions onto as agenda items at any time they want to, because everyone has the shared editing privileges to the document. But there's also a specific point in the meeting when we're just getting started on the work portion, we call it the agenda, portion of the meeting. We leave space. Okay, is there anything else that anyone would like to add for consideration for the agenda today? And so even things that are right there in the moment, like, oh, I'm really sensing this, let's get it on the agenda. And then we often do some kind of a sorting and voting, prioritizing process, because often we have more things than we can talk about in any given meeting, but we have a way of kind of collectively weighing in on what we should tackle today. But people know that eventually we're going to get to that topic, and things that are more urgent will get addressed more quickly and stuff like that. How did that go with answering the question? Any further follow-ups or anything?
I think that sounds answered, and I'm going to put the living agenda template in the chat box in a second. So if you're curious to look at it, you will have that. And there are a few longer comments here. So we practice the talking circle. We're all sitting at eye level. Each person, one is not above the other. So this sounds like an addition to what we're saying. And okay, each person standing has the floor, and when they're finished, they can say aho or another word in our indigenous languages for being done. Then the next person knows it is their turn to talk, but also people have the right not to speak. This works in Zoom with some adaptation.
Yeah. And
this kind of honoring when people are speaking and letting them finish, and the point of being eye level is. Thanks for offering that perspective. Mm-hmm. And the small group provoked my own thinking about very complex power dynamics where there are multitudes of factors at play. How would you prioritize so as not to get sunk without feeling you're making traction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Can I comment on that too?
Yeah.
Because I'm excited, because I feel like sometimes it's really hard, of course, but I often feel like once people get the hang of this, the tension surfacing, like the process, what needs to be addressed comes to the fore. Like, we don't have to tackle everything at once. Like, having a mindset of we're going to get it all perfect is really dangerous. Like, you know, having a mindset of like, what little thing could we try now that's safe enough to try that would move us forward so that we gather information from it and we can, you know, iterate our way into the future is a much safer in a sense. Both more, you can get more movement, but you can also keep it, you know, from blowing up perhaps, you know, or something. So I'm not sure, like, or sometimes there's conflicting, you know, sense of things that come to the fore kind of all at once, but most often we find that we get our tensions out on the table, it becomes obvious which little piece we should address first, and we do that, and then we move forward, and then the next piece after that, and things evolve.
Yeah, I think piecing it out is helpful. There are so many different power dynamics that could be going on, and piecing out what we approach things with incremental change. How do we make incremental change towards the ways that we want to be working together? And so we piece that out through tensions, and that's one way to do it. And I'm sure that there are lots of other ways that could layer in with that as well, like the other things that people have learned from their power shifting and power analyses. We have 3 minutes, and I want to make sure that folks get a chance to have a little checkout. We end up all of our meetings at a close or a checkout, and there are quite a few people in here. So we're going to see how this goes, but we were thinking we do a 1-word checkout just to see what's kind of have everyone's voice into the room, even though it's just 1 word. There's a lot of explicit power here with Daniel and I having most of the airspace and deciding the flow, which is there. So hopefully you'll go along with this.